My name is Ava. I was 22, freshly hired for a copywriting gig in Midtown, and living in Jersey without enough cash or patience to commute into Manhattan every day. When a Craigslist ad flashed across my phone, room for rent, Hell's Kitchen, cheap, quiet building, I clicked before my brain caught up with my hopes. The rent was suspiciously low. The photos grainy but charming in a way city apartments often pretend to be. I took the subway into the city the next day and met the man who'd posted the ad. He introduced himself as Mr. Carlyle, a small, awkward fellow who kept laughing at his own pauses. His eyes were polite but restless. His handshake was damp. He showed me the unit like a privateer showing a cabin, quick, practiced, and a little too smooth. He warned me, almost as if it were a selling point, that the place came with one roommate. Very quiet, keeps to himself, he said. He rapped on the closed bedroom door down the hall, called a name I misheard the first time. Bren! No answer. He told me Bren was probably asleep and that we should talk in the living room. The apartment was decent. Old wood floors with the soft croon of settling, sun coming in from a fire escape, a small kitchen that smelled faintly of lemon oil. I signed the application on a folded kitchen table and left with a key the following week when he rang to say the room was mine. I felt like an adult key jangling in my palm, city life beginning. Moving day made everything feel real. My dad helped haul boxes up the stairs. The building's elevator, a relic that moaned like a ship. We stacked my books and a thrift store dresser into the snug room. The strange thing back then was how quiet the place was, despite there being 2 other rooms. Mr. Carlyle never once introduced me to Bren. The door to that room was always shut, and sometimes I heard the muffled rustle of movement behind it, like someone pacing or just turning in bed. The first night I tried to be neighborly. I'd intended to knock the moment I heard the door click open and step out, assuming that would be the chance to say hello. But before my hand reached the knob, the apartment's front door slammed hard in the hall. The sound vibrated through the whole unit and settled into my bones. Whoever had left had gone or slammed it in anger. Either way, it cut the chance short. Over the next couple of nights, I noticed the same odd choreography. Footsteps in the corridor outside my door, a pause as if someone were listening at the threshold, then the slow retreat of shoes. Once, late and half asleep, I could see the outline of 2 feet through the crack of my door shapes, traced by light seeping from the hallway. They didn't belong to any courier or neighbor. They felt deliberate, like a quiet patrol. I wanted to call out, to demand a hello, but that lull of not yet acquaintance kept my mouth closed. I told myself I was being dramatic. A new city, new building, thin walls. But my muscles kept their own memory. Jaw clenched, shoulders tight, always ready. On the 3rd night, the apartment's creaks became rhythm. There were thumps from the closed room across the hall, staccato noises like someone stacking boxes, or maybe heavy boots being moved on the floor. I tried to be reasonable. New tenant settling in, noisy at night, late work shifts, maybe construction nearby. The next morning I found a note wedged under my door from Mr. Carlyle. Bren out for work. Keep it down, thanks. I folded the paper twice, the ink a neat script, and added it to a pile of receipts and flyers. But that night, my roommate's door stood ajar. a sliver of light leaking into the living room. My curiosity finally trumped my caution. I went to the door, heart thudding, and pushed it open, just a sliver to say hello. Inside, nothing but a single, institutional chair sitting in the corner, a bare floor, and a dust line where the rest of the furniture should have been. The room felt staged, emptied quickly. The light buzzed overhead like a fluorescent interrogation. I stood there with the doorknob in my hand and felt the floor drop out under me. I shut the door as quietly as I could and pressed my back against the cool wall of the hallway. My skin prickled with that raw instinct you get when you've seen something you weren't supposed to. The room wasn't lived in. It wasn't even half moved out. It was nothing but an empty shell with a lone chair, as if designed for one purpose: to make someone sit and watch. My brain churned through rationalizations, but none of them stuck. Why would a tenant sleep on the floor with no bedding? Why would a landlord rent a room without a lease if the roommate wasn't real? I retreated to my bedroom, locked the door, and perched on the bed with my phone in hand. A pounding headache crept over me, a sharp reminder that adrenaline was already coursing my bloodstream. I scrolled to Mr. Carlyle's number, thumb trembling as I dialed. The ring buzzed in my ear, and then another sound hit me, jagged and wrong. The very same ringtone, muffled, vibrating from inside my closet. For a moment I froze, the phone to my ear, hearing both rings echo, one in my hand, one from the dark behind the closet door. On the third ring, mine cut off. Whoever had the phone declined the call. That realization hit me like a knife sliding cold across skin. If his phone was in my closet, then so was he. My mouth went dry. Every rational explanation I tried to conjure just evaporated. There was no Bren. The empty room was a prop. Carlyle had been in the apartment all along, slipping in and out, and now he was only feet away. I pressed the phone to my chest to muffle the tiny shaking sound it made and forced myself to move. Slowly. My closet door was 5 steps away, but I couldn't look at it. I turned toward the bathroom instead and bolted. The bathroom door slammed. Lock clicked. I pressed my weight against it, as though that flimsy bolt would stop him if he lunged. My hands shook so hard it took me 3 tries to dial 911. The dispatcher's voice was calm, but mine broke in sharp bursts. "He's in my apartment. Closet. Unlocked in the bathroom." I could hear her steady instructions. "Stay quiet. Stay put. Help was coming." But my ears strained against every creak, every soft shuffle in the apartment. The silence outside the bathroom was worse than noise, the not knowing. The image of him crouched under my bed, or waiting by the door with that damp handshake and forced smile. Red and blue lights stuttered against the frosted bathroom window less than 5 minutes later. Then boots thundered on the hallway floor. A deep voice boomed, "NYPD!" My chest cracked with relief. I unlocked the bathroom and stumbled out, almost colliding with a uniformed officer. 2 more fanned through the apartment, guns drawn. Their shouts echoed off bare walls. A minute later, "Got him!" They dragged Carlyle out from under my bed, his shirt covered in dust, his face blank as slate. He didn't resist, he didn't even blink, just stared at me, like I was the one intruding. The officers cuffed him and read him his rights. their words swallowed by the thunder of my own pulse. The empty chair in the other room sat there like a punchline, silent, mocking. The police asked me questions right there in the living room, their notebooks open, pens scratching. I tried to hold my voice steady as I explained everything. The fake lease, the phantom roommate, the sound of his ringtone inside my closet. One officer shook his head, muttering, "Jesus," while the other flipped through the drawers in Carlyle's so-called office. They found nothing. No lease agreements, no documents, nothing to prove he had any right to the apartment. When I pressed for answers, who was Bren? How did Carlyle even get the keys? The officers could only shrug. "We'll run him," they said, "but people like this slip through cracks." That night I slept at my parents', in Jersey, sitting awake on the couch with all the lights on. Every time the house creaked, my stomach twisted, convinced he'd somehow slipped free. The image of him curled under my bed wouldn't leave me. I kept picturing what might have happened if I hadn't called 911, if I'd opened the closet instead of the bathroom door, if I'd gone to bed believing Bren was real. Sleep came only when the sun rose, and even then it was thin and broken. The next day, my dad drove with me back into the city to collect my things. I didn't enter the apartment alone. I couldn't. The landlord imposter's absence didn't matter. The walls felt poisoned. My dad asked if I wanted to check Bren's room one last time, but I refused. I didn't need to see that chair again. We loaded everything into his car, my body shaking with relief the moment the last box slammed shut in the trunk. By then, the real management of the building had been contacted, and they confirmed what the cops already suspected. Mr. Carlyle never owned or even rented that apartment. He was a fraud, a squatter who had somehow acquired a set of keys. The name Bren had never been on any paperwork. There had never been anyone else. I found another place within the week, a crowded walk-up with too many roommates but real locks and real leases. Every time I turned the key in that door, I told myself it was different, that this time the person on the other side actually belonged there. Still, some nights, when the pipes groaned or the floorboards popped, I'd imagine feet standing outside my door, quiet, patient, watching, waiting. When I was 19, broke, and working long shifts at a chicken farm outside town, the last thing I cared about was luxury. Convenience and price were my only criteria. That's why the Zillow ad caught my attention instantly. A fully furnished shared apartment for dirt cheap, just a few minutes from work. The photos showed a modest place, beige walls, mismatched furniture, carpet with bald patches, but it had a bed, a dresser, and heat. That was all I needed. The man renting it out called himself Ben. He had to be 70 at least, thin as a broom handle, with shaky hands and a voice so deep it rasped. He didn't ask for references or paperwork, just a verbal agreement that I'd pay him weekly. No contract, no lease. At the time, it seemed like a blessing. He even let me use everything in the house. The old couch, the ancient TV, the chipped plates. All included, he croaked when I moved in, as though that generosity should earn him sainthood. I didn't pay much attention to him beyond polite nods. I was always exhausted after work, stumbling to the spare room where I'd collapse into the creaky bed and barely move until morning. For a while, it was easy. Almost routine. Cheap rent, close to work, no hassle. But that ended on a night when I jolted awake to the sound of my door opening. A strip of light cut across the floorboards. There he was, Ben standing in the doorway, his silhouette filling the frame, one hand clamped on the knob. His eyes glistened faintly in the light, unblinking. His voice, deeper than I'd ever heard it, rattled the silence. "Stay out of the basement. I know you've been down there." My throat locked. I hadn't even touched that door. I stammered, defending myself, swearing I hadn't gone near it. He didn't respond, just shut the door with a slow, deliberate click and shuffled away. His footsteps faded down the stairs. I lay frozen, the words echoing in my skull. Stay out of the basement. It was such a bizarre thing to say. Why accuse me? Why warn me? A normal landlord would have just locked it. Something about the way he said it left my skin crawling, like there was a layer of meaning buried under his words that I didn't want to understand. The next day I was off from work, and when Ben rattled out in his rust-colored jalopy, I was left alone in the house. I stared at the basement door for what felt like hours. Curiosity ate at me until it was unbearable. The thought circled in my head. Why did he tell me not to go down there if there's nothing to see? The handle was cold under my palm, colder than the rest of the house. I pulled it open, expecting a stiff resistance, but the door creaked wide easily, spilling a wave of stale, earthy air into the hallway. A staircase yawned before me, steep and narrow, sinking into shadow. My breath hitched. Every nerve screamed to leave it shut, but Ben's voice gnawed at me like a dare. "I know you've been down there." I gripped the railing and descended. Each step groaned beneath my weight, the wood damp and swollen. At the bottom, my hand slid along the wall until it found a switch. A dim bulb buzzed to life, swinging slightly on its cord. For a moment, it almost looked ordinary. Boxes stacked against the wall, an old workbench cluttered with tools, the smell of mildew and dust. My heart slowed. Maybe I was being paranoid. But in the far corner stood a door, squat and out of place, like it had been added later. A black strip of rubber lined the bottom, sealing it tight. The closer I came, the heavier the air grew, until the stench punched me in the face. Sweet rot, copper tang, decay. My eyes watered as I grabbed the knob. It stuck, heavy and reluctant, as though something didn't want me inside. When it finally gave way, the rubber hissed as it peeled back. What I found made my knees nearly buckle. The small room was a charnel pit. Stains marred the concrete floor, thick, rusty smears that told a story no bleach could erase. In the corner, black plastic bags were stacked like grotesque parcels, each stretched into long, sagging shapes. The air burned my throat. And on the wall above a workbench, a small camera lens blinked red, aimed squarely at the space as if recording every grim detail. My stomach lurched. Bile rose. I clapped a hand over my mouth, choking back the scream clawing its way out. I forced myself to raise my phone, snap a single photo, and then I fled up the stairs 2 at a time, lungs searing, ears ringing with the imagined sound of footsteps chasing me. In the spare room, my hands shook so violently I could barely stuff my clothes into a garbage bag. I had to get out. Now. As I zipped the bag shut, the front door slammed below with a violence that rattled the frame. He was home. The sound of his boots on the floorboards was enough to snap me into motion. I slung the garbage bag over my shoulder and forced my face into calm as I stepped into the upstairs hallway. Ben's voice didn't greet me this time, only the sound of the basement door creaking open, followed by his heavy tread descending. My blood turned to ice. He was going down there to check. This was my only chance. I padded down the stairs as lightly as I could. Every muscle braced for him to reappear. The front door loomed just 10 steps away. I forced myself not to sprint, not to make noise, until the last 3 steps when panic broke through. I bolted, shoved the door open, and launched myself into the night air. The old man's voice bellowed from below, a roar of rage that sent my legs pumping faster. I didn't look back. My car sat in the gravel drive like a lifeline. I dove inside, jammed the key, and peeled away so fast the tires spat stones against the siding. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning everything else. Only when I reached the road, headlights cutting through the empty dark, did I allow myself to breathe. 15 miles later, I skidded into my brother's farmyard, burst into his kitchen, and shoved my phone at him. The photo glowed on the screen, the plastic-wrapped shapes, the stains, the camera lens. "You're an idiot," he said, his face pale. "Why didn't you call the sheriff the second you saw that?" So I did. With shaking hands, I dialed 911 and told the dispatcher everything. The basement, the bags, the smell, the hidden camera. I gave them the address and begged them to move fast, before Ben cleared it all away. Hours later, headlights swept across the farmyard again. A sheriff's cruiser rolled up, and an officer stepped out, asking for my ID and a full recounting of events. I complied, voice ragged. He scribbled in his notebook, then finally said the words that made my knees weaken. "You did the right thing. He's in custody. We caught him trying to move evidence out of the basement. Didn't make it in time." They wouldn't say what exactly was in the bags. They wouldn't describe the stains or the tools on that workbench. But they didn't have to. The look in the deputy's eyes told me enough. I stayed at my brother's farm for weeks afterward, sleeping in the spare room, sometimes staring at the ceiling until dawn. I kept thinking of Ben's face in that doorway, his voice gravelly and flat. "Stay out of the basement.